Okay, here we go. It's that magic hour. Hello, everybody. My name is Seth Barker. I'm the first vice president of the International Society of Fire Service Instructors, and welcome to the happy hour week. This, again, is started with momentum from not being able to join each other at our normal social at FDIC this year. And we started doing this to kind of get everybody together and get some good positive networking, and it's been hugely successful. And every session we try to get somebody or some theme going on, so it kind of drives the discussion. But I want to really reiterate that this is a membership driven discussion, and so if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, just raise your hand, rudely interrupt, or I'm monitoring that chat icon up there. If anybody has a question, we can fire it off in chat. If you called in, or if you don't have a live video feed, it does help if you turn your video feed on, so I can see that you have a question and raising your hand, or that you green mute your mic. So with that, I would ask that everybody except me and Mary mute our mics until you have a question. And if you do have a question that you don't want to put on the chat, then you can just unmute, and I'll rudely again interrupt Mary so we can get the party started, so to speak. Well, Mary is a retired firefighter from the South Metro Denver Fire Rescue Authority, an adjunct instructor and course developer for the National Fire Academy, a recently retired online instructor for the Colorado State's Fire and Emergency Service Administration degree program, and an associate member of the ISFSI's Professional Development Committee, and a past board member of the ISFSI. Through company, Fireline training and consulting, teaches workplace writing classes nationwide, and advises and assists agencies with developing graded written components and promotional process. I first met Mary, I don't know if she knows this or not, but I first met her at another organization's conference that's going to go unnamed, and she was teaching part of my company officer leadership seminar class. I think it was in the first year track, and I instantly kind of attached to her and asked her to help me out with maybe write some stuff or pass it on with Billy Goldfeder, and I've kind of been listening to her speak every time she's around me ever since. She's super smart, pretty valuable in my career. So with that, Mary, take it away.
Thank you, Seth. That was very nice. If any of you have attended any of my classes or conference sessions, you've heard my theory that explains why we're here even talking about this topic today. My theory is that most of you and the people that you work with came into the fire and or EMS services because they wanted to run into burning buildings, because there was a passion for firefighting and or for working in the field of emergency medicine. Those are the aspects of our work that draw us in. I'm betting there is nobody here, and very few people, if any, in your departments that came to this job looking for opportunities to write. However, I suspect they have found them. You have found them, and probably way more than you ever anticipated. If your department is like most, the majority of your training time and dollars go into the fighting the fires and practicing everything that needs to be practiced in the EMS field, and all for very, very good and justified reasons. But when the writing piece is completely ignored, many people find themselves uncomfortably unprepared for many of the actual tasks that end up facing them at work. And so it's that gap that we're really here to talk about today. And our focus will primarily be hearing some of your issues, hearing some of the practices that you've put into place to try to address this problem, supported by my adding on to what I have seen or heard or know works for people in other departments. So that's where we're beginning. And Seth, would you like to chime in here?
Yeah, so I think, when I first started down this journey before I met you, I was all concentrated and focused on report writing and PCRs and stuff like that, and trying to come up with a kind of a model way to make sure that was intelligent and digestible. And then I realized it was much bigger than that, right? When you get onto the company officer and executive chief officer level, where you have to start writing a lot more for a lot more things, you really got to articulate. So why does the quality of departmental writing matter in your mind?
And he's talking to you, not to me.
Anybody? I'm going to start calling on people. Let's go, Pete. Come on, man.
All right. So whether we like it or not, the quality of your writing is a reflection, or people interpret that as a reflection of your intelligence. You could be personally a very good speaker. You can be very smart and communicate well with people in person, but sometimes you're required to communicate to them in writing. And I've come across, I'm sure many of us have come across people's written word that was just shockingly poor. I mean, it really is like, is this the same person I know? And if I know the person, I can get past it. But if I don't know the person, or I don't know them well, and they come across as being functionally illiterate because they can't put together a cohesive report, that really damages their credibility and all those other things, right? So, and a lot of times, more and more, we don't confront this every day. It used to be you confronted this every day of your life. Now more and more we communicate in sound bites through email and things like that, and we can get away with that. But then when we're forced to, or we're in that position where all of a sudden now we have to put together something lengthy and comprehensive and get from point A to point B, we fall flat on our feet because we just have not gotten any experience in this whatsoever. And I dare say they're not teaching it much in the schools either anymore, but I'll leave that to Mary. I mean, that's just my opinion based on what you see. I don't have any firsthand, but yeah, it can reflect on how people perceive you as a professional. If you don't write professionally, they won't perceive you as a professional. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Anybody else have thoughts on that? With why it matters, how you've seen it play out in your own departments?
Well, kind of to piggyback on what Peter said, that whole thing, we're trying to tout ourselves and train ourselves as a professional fire service. But if that doesn't translate to funding entities, to the public, I mean, we may be the most professional firemen in the world, but if we can't articulate that through writing, as simple as press releases all the way to budget justifications, we don't look professional to them anyway. So why would they give us advantageous monetary compensation to work on professional development if we don't, well, like Peter said, we don't articulate that ourselves? It's pretty hard to look professional even if we are.
Anyone else?
Yeah, hi guys, Chris Bronker here. So I live up in the far north. Hopefully, can you hear me okay on my mic here first of all? So, so yes, I do have an accent. Originally I'm from Britain. I immigrated to Canada 20 years ago. So communication is a learning skill, whether it's written or verbal or, gesture. So for me, coming from one culture to another, there's a learning curve for me for sure. You and I can say the same things, but they mean different things. Written word is a bad thing sometimes. So the old adage that if you write an email, then if it's disciplinary or if it's something that needs kind of follow up by a senior staff, then you got to write it out, make sure you read it, come back about an hour or so and read it again, and then maybe come back and read it again. So make sure it reads okay. The written word culturally can be different. So, I classify myself as bilingual English now because I can, get away with what is acceptable in Canada as well as what's in Britain. I'm not owned in either place now. But my dad said when he was alive, your communication can be taught. So, and I am a believer of that. So I'm excited to see what Mary might say. So that's the first time you've heard from me.
You bring up a very good point, and you talked about the need to write something and rewrite it. And one of my observations from reading a lot of documents is that many of us end up submitting what is really a rough draft just based on time crunches. So we have a deadline, we procrastinated, it's time to turn it in, and you feel like, I think it's good enough. But when we turn in documents that haven't been read and reread, and usually reworked a bit, we're turning in a rough draft, and that's really what it looks like. So that was a good point to address. when I first started talking to my coworkers about the idea of putting together writing classes, the guys I worked with did not say, "Ooh, good idea, Mary, writing classes, bring them on." No, basically when I even suggested it, they said, "No, no, 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 don't put together a writing class. If you put together a writing class, the chief's gonna make us take a writing class. We don't want no stinking writing classes." That was more the response I got from my coworkers. And their concern was this. Their concern was that our training plates were already full. They were overflowing. And this was before the years of terrorism even, and COVID, and all the things that additional issues on your plate. And so it was a fair question. Why this? Why now? And I'm going to put that question back to you in this form. I'd first of all like to ask you, any of you, to share any examples, if you have them, of your department or another one that you're very familiar with having actually suffered consequences from a poorly written document. So have any of you had that particular experience?
Do I gotta be the poster child all the time here?
Go ahead.
So I'll spin it just a little bit, Mary, and because it wasn't so much that the department suffered, but the employees suffered. So we quite literally had out here in Algonquin Lake in the Hills during my tenure. I'll try to keep it broad enough to protect the guilty. But we had a guy fire himself through a written document, and that's the long and short of it, right? What he wrote and submitted led to his dismissal. Where if he had better counsel or better, just ask somebody, would you read this first, right? It wouldn't even have to have been counsel. Just have anybody read this for me. Anybody would have caught it. Anybody would have said, don't you dare turn that in. But he didn't think to do that. He just had to write, he had to write a response to a charge. He wrote the response to the charge, and it led to his dismissal without a doubt. He couldn't unwrite it. You can't unsend that. It doesn't go away.
Yeah, that's an excellent
Very
example.
real consequence. Bob's got one.
Yeah, Bob?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think that's a big thing these days, is especially with email, having someone look at it before you send it. That's where I would say, I would have experienced, or the department has experienced things that have been bad for the employees or bad for management, just because of, wait, did anybody proofread that real quick? Because there's a few things that you might want to recall that before everybody sees it, type of thing.
It's scary to think how many people think you can delete an email, and we should all know better than that nowadays, and we don't. That's pretty scary.
My father was retired up the food chain in IBM, and kind of was before the iPhone came out and all that stuff to full force. But he always told me, don't ever write something down unless you want it to come back to you full circle, ever. And I've taken that as the gospel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very good advice. Anybody else?
It's really hard to kind of have these conversations about like somebody that's written something without naming guilty parties or anything along those lines.
Name anybody. And Caleb, I want to interject there. This whole conversation is not for pointing fingers. It's for drawing the lessons learned, because there, but for the grace of God, go on. So thank you for that.
Yeah, kind of what I wanted to bring up is that there was in sort of one of the email groups that we had some people that were that had some intentions that were good, but the way that they communicated across the email did not seem like their intentions were good. So one of the things that I would say is, like you said, have somebody else look over and say, is this really the intentions that you're trying to portray or that you're trying to convey? And they may say, yeah, no, I want to come across as a jerk, and that's their right. But at that point, they have the second set of eyes on that to say, this is how it comes across to me.
And here are the potential consequences of coming across like a jerk, because there are some. And that brings up a point that I'll interject here with email. I won't keep the focus there, but it's definitely worth bringing up, because it's probably where everybody in your department has their most visible written image. And you all have a written image, so you want to be sure it's supporting the professionalism that you are trying to portray in every other part of your work. But when you are confronted with an email that's drawing a lot of emotion, I strongly recommend that you write your emotional laden emails in Microsoft Word, because when we're in email, our brain from the minute we start that message is just thinking about hitting send. It's not a venue that is conducive to proofreading and editing and waiting for another set of eyes. That send button's right there. I can check this off my list. So for anything with serious consequence, I recommend write it in Word, sit on it, hit print instead of send. You can look at it the next morning, decide. Usually we feel better just because we wrote it. We got it off our chest. In the morning, you might write more of a message that's the one that will be safe to live forever and ever, amen, in cyberspace. So that would be one of my tips, is use Word to your advantage for significant or emotional emails.
I think if like from the book, was it Team of Rivals or whatever, President Lincoln would write memos and then just not send them, or write letters and then just not send them. So he had them all in his desk. And a lot of those were stuff like that, where he just went back and visited and was like, no, that's not what I was trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So building on that last question about if your department or individuals have suffered consequences, I'd like to give another twist to that question. And that is this: have you observed documents that when you read them, you basically looked at them, thought, I hope my eyes are the last ones to cross this piece of paper, because if this gets out there, I'm going to look bad, or my chief's going to look bad, or my coworker's going to look bad. And this question draws from an experience I had. One time I was on light duty, and I was working at the front desk in admin because somebody was on vacation. So somebody came in asking me for copies of one of our reports, which, by the way, as a firefighter, I had no idea how often people came in and asked for copies of our reports. And I suspect a lot of your firefighters don't know that either. But anyway, somebody came in, asked for a report. I went, in those days, it was still in a file cabinet. So I went to the other room, got it out of the file cabinet, and I looked at it and I thought, how can I make this report disappear between here and the front desk? Because he's going to look really bad. We're going to look bad as a department. So in that spirit, do you have examples, again, for the sake of drawing lessons learned, where you saw documents that you hoped would never get a life beyond that moment? Well, good. Go ahead.
I think I've seen more texts and posts that are hugely damaging than I've actually seen written documents, that people don't realize that texts and posts are discoverable, especially when we start using department issued mediums. So I think I've seen that stuff be far more damaging most recently than actual written documents.
Yeah, that's another whole beast now. Dustin has written examples of reports to the mayor from the fire marshal that had more grammatical errors than a second grader. And I saw that too with some chief officers in our department who, before we had computers in our fire department, everything went through the chain of command. So if the chief wrote a letter or a communication, a memo to the line, it went through a secretary, and then it would go down the ladder as far as it needed to go. And the same thing with going up. And once we had computers in the firehouse, suddenly one of our chief officers skipped the secretary layer and went directly to us. And we discovered for the first time, no one knew it, that he was borderline illiterate. He probably had a lot of learning issues, but he did damage to his reputation once he put something out there directly to us in writing. So I won't belabor that point anymore. But I do want to talk about the why this, why now, and some of my own answers to that question. And one would be that we do live in a litigious society, and we no longer are protected under the umbrella of the Good Samaritan Clause, which was sort of the norm when I started. But because of the vast types of calls that we respond to and the large number of services, we fall under civil litigation. And whenever we're in court, there will be one attorney in whose best interest it is to discredit our testimonies. And as a profession, the attorneys know we have a weak reputation as writers. And so they will look at our reports and see, did she just give me an easy out here? Can I just discredit this testimony based on carelessness of a report? Because if there was carelessness in the report, we might have carelessness in the performance of a duty, and we can eliminate somebody who one of your citizens needs your voice as a credible voice to support whatever happened. So that would be one reason. And something else that really makes a difference is the NFPA standards around our jobs. In particular, let's start with 1021. 1021 has, at my last count, 58 substandards calling for writing as a requisite skill set, 58 substandards. And that number has only grown. When I first started, I wrote an article for Fire Chief Magazine many years ago. I think it was around 2002. And at that time, I counted the number of substandards, and it was 40, and they just keep building. And yet, we don't test people for those skill sets. And I don't know if 1021 calls for anything more often than writing skills. And if it does, it's probably verbal communication skills that 1021 emphasizes. So for 1041, for training officers, the last version consolidated many of the tasks. The previous version, which I think would have been around 2008, had 22 substandards for 1041. 1001 has 3 or 4 of them. I mean, every position. And so because of that, we should be including some sort of a graded written component for promoting to those positions that reflects the actual skill sets we're indicating people will need to have when they assume that position. And then another one is, I think we forget about this sometimes, but it's customer service. That our customers, the people we respond to, need good information in our reports to help them in insurance claims, perhaps, because we're part of a bigger spectrum. That's our role in that, is to treat them or to put out a fire, and then to create the living document that's going to support all the next layers involved in that scene. So, go ahead.
One of the things that I wasn't prepared for, I think, which from a company officer standpoint is not only writing reports, but being able to articulate thoughts and write papers, because now I'm in the pain cave with EFO and master's degree, and you definitely have to do some varsity writing in that level, So I guess I would ask everybody on this call that, what type of documents are they responsible to write? And, and furthermore, how about their firefighters underneath them are responsible to write? I think that the low hanging fruit is that EPCR, but that's kind of a formatted thing. And Mary has an excellent exercise of what, that PCR means on many levels that she does on a basic writing class level. But I guess I would challenge everybody on this call, what type of documents do you have to write in your organization so you don't look like a fool? And I can call on people.
I mean, there's some like policy development, SOG type stuff. And then there's like all the way up to like usage agreements for our facility, things like that. And then like the annual training plan, lesson plans. It's most of my job. I wouldn't say most of my job, but it's a lot of my job is to be putting that stuff out.
So Caleb, go ahead.
Well, I just had a question for Caleb, not to put you on the spot, but Caleb's one of the students currently in the training officer credential class. Have you found that there's that we are holding you all as students to that exceptional level in terms of the assignments and the degree of writing that you have to do in that program?
I would think so. I mean, obviously, there's a lot that has to be put on paper and graded, but the feedback it's not a completion report. It's actual feedback, which is, what I was looking for in the class. It's not like, hey, good job, you got it done. There's good info giving me feedback on how to improve it too.
Caleb, when you came into your position, did you have to demonstrate your writing abilities at any level?
So part of the assessment center was you looked at the JPRs for 3 different levels, and I had to put out a training plan based off of those JPRs. So yeah, I mean, a little bit.
And do you know if that was a graded portion in terms of your ability to write?
Yes.
Okay, good. That's helpful. So Caleb has started listing some of the documents that he needs to write. He said like policy development, usage agreements, training plans, lesson plans. What else do you guys need to write in the course of a work week, a work day, or a work week, or once a month, or once or twice a year? What are some of your writing responsibilities?
I think one for operational effectiveness within the organization is our evaluations. And so whether you receive one or you write one, I mean, it's a good way to really deduct the capabilities of your leadership or whoever's evaluating you. And so if you write this just atrocious evaluation, I mean, that doesn't derive a lot of respect from your subordinates. And the antithesis is true. If you're taking an evaluation, you write your rebuttal to it or answer to it, and that's also a reflection on your capabilities as a subordinate as well. And that, can involve, we've had this issue internally where it hurts the organizational cohesion as a whole just because of our ability to articulate proper evaluations and how that develops our staff.
Yeah, and I'm thinking even of the modeling with that if you write a week evaluation that you've just modeled to the recipient, that this isn't something that we value necessarily. Bob?
Yeah, I was going to say, it brings up a point there that I was thinking of is, there's 2 types of writing that I do, or a lot of people in the fire service do, is, there's the formal probationary reports and policies and that type of stuff. And there's the informal that, which some emails can be formal, but there's the informal emails and that type of stuff. But you really have to look at both of those and be good at both of them, because if you're not good at the formal side, you may be strong at your informal side, but your formal side is probably the most important, which bleeds over to when you're doing your informal stuff, that you make it a little bit more formal or a little more inclusive. So what you want to have down is the nature is grass, and people there again, like you said before, look at you and say, oh, this is an email I probably should read instead, or this is the message I probably should look at instead of, the informal stuff that, most of us put out 9 times out of 10 every day.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any other documents that you write regularly that haven't been mentioned yet that you'd like us to think about? So,
Logan threw a couple things up on the chat there, Mary, that
thank you.
weren't specifically covered. Post-incident analysis, which is a little bit different. It's a good point. And risk and needs assessments, which are, those are a little more challenging because you have to write conclusions, right? And you have to be able to put that kind of disparate information together. So I think those were 2 good points that he brought up. 2 good ideas.
Yeah.
And then also the last one I had late in my career was responding to letters, responding to complaints and inquiries and things like that, which you could do report writing for decades and you don't run into this, and then all of a sudden you wind up in a position in your department where you're supposed to answer to the public, and whether it's complaints or just inquiries or stuff like that, you're actually writing letters. You're writing personal letters.
Yes.
And I found that a challenge. It was very different than what I was used to up to that point.
that's very interesting, and it's a whole different audience that than you might be used to writing to as well. Dustin also wrote accreditation documents and city council reports. These are consequential documents with fairly critical audiences as well. Something I always like to bring up is when I was a firefighter, especially with our reports, I felt like we were basically writing them for CYA purposes. Like, you know, who else looks at these? And the answer is a whole lot of people potentially look at these. For the vast majority of them, nobody. But people do read them. They need good information. They might need to act upon it. So I always encourage people to think about the legitimate end users of the documents, that each and every document that you write.
So Mary, you know, in the beginning of our process, just to get, or part of the assessment center, excuse me, for just getting a job, entry-level firefighter position, you know, they have to fill out in their application, can demonstrate knowledge and ability with Microsoft Word and Excel. And everybody just always checks that box. Well, we make them actually show up and have a blank computer screen, answer a question in a Word document, and then save it to the computer. And it blows my mind how many people can't do that, for one. And then from a promotional process standpoint, like Caleb was touching on, from a company officer to a training officer, they have to demonstrate good report writing or good writing skills, and they have to do another exercise of writing out a narrative or a lesson plan. And I'm blown away at the failure rate of that, or just how much people suck at it when they know it's going to be on the promotional exam.
Yes, that's amazing.
So I guess I would like to hear from everybody else, you know, what they require within their organization. And does that sound on the mark, or too steep, or too loose, or what does everybody else do?
We just finished the engineer's assessment process, so part of that is to do a report that's graded. And then, like I said, for my position, there was the report component, or the putting the training plan together component. But outside of like grading reports, I don't think that there's a formal process for at the company officer level, like, I don't know, writing a memo or a commendation letter or any of those things.
Anybody else? Does anybody else have any kind of a graded written component for, let's say, the company officer position, that to just take a look, is this person going to be able to do all these tasks, like writing the evaluations, just as one example?
We used to have it was a full day inbox process where you had all these tasks you had to do inside of the computer, and in between doing your work on your computer, they'd pull you out for your tactical assessment or your personnel assessment, or whatever. But we've gone away from that a little bit, because it was a weighted score. What we found, unfortunately, is some of the people that did really good on the writing part weren't as good at the tactical and the the personnel type stuff. So, but the problem with that is I mean, like myself, I get appointed to be the training officer because it's my turn, not because it's like, oh, it's your turn, you're going in. And all of a sudden I'm in the barrel of, communicating with everyone over email and writing, documents and this. And so, it's one of those catch-22s where you need to have that component. But you gotta have a well-rounded person. That's part of it, I guess, is what I'm saying. But we don't do that part anymore. We used to.
Anybody else? Chris?
Yeah, I think if you work for a fire department that's seniority based, then that is potentially is an issue, because identify you have 2 days more experience than me. They don't have necessarily the skills and ability to do that position. So I'm not wishing to go down a rabbit hole for a discussion, but that is another reason perhaps why some departments don't include that in a promotion, because I like the idea of being tested for skills, abilities, and knowledge, and that person gets the position. But you can't do that in a seniority-based unionized environment. That's what I will say.
Thank you. Anybody else? Bob, to your point, there are many departments I work with that do have a graded written component for positions that come with writing responsibility. And those components usually reflect a task that is a common task for that position they're trying to promote to. And to address the problem that you brought up, and I think that's one of the bigger concerns, is we are concerned that with a graded written component, we're going to be hiring book smart people and not technically smart people. And one of the ways to deal with it is give it, and I would say almost everybody that I work with only gives a graded written component maybe 10 to 15% of the total value. So it's enough to motivate candidates to start working on that skill set beforehand. And it could be a deal breaker, 10 to 15%, but probably not. It gives you plenty of room to still evaluate all the skill sets that you need from people in those positions. But this is a pretty consequential one, that when we ignore it, it leads to all the other unintended consequences from somebody being in the position that never had the skills. It's like, hey, you didn't ask me, you didn't require it. So just including it in the promotional process will motivate people 2 years in advance, like they start reading books that they need to know about and so forth. This will be one of the tasks that they have the opportunity to try to begin to strengthen. We lose sight of the fact that writing is a trainable skill. It's if you were born to be a gifted writer, you're probably not in the fire service. You probably went a different direction professionally. But it's a trainable skill that allows you to, that could allow you to comfortably complete the basic writing tasks that'll face you. Caller one, I'm not sure if you're talking to us. We can hear you sort of.
Yeah, I got him muted, Mary. Just shut him in.
Okay.
You know, what I guess it's helped me out a lot and forced me into trying to be more competent at this skill was going back to school. And, you know, whether you're in the camp or not, going through EFO really forces you out of your comfort zone because you have to write a lot for your EFO, obviously. So, you know, trying to relearn that whole skill and be good at it and intelligent at it was extremely challenging for me. I think Ginger with FDIC does a great job of forcing you into, when you're going to speak at FDIC, if you have to write an article and they're going to possibly publish that article. So that really makes you challenge you to get outside the box. But I guess I would ask the group of, you know, what practice, that's what's helped me personally, and what's helped the group in improving their writing skills or best practices, so to speak, or what's helped them with their writing.
I think generally people are just afraid to get started on it because they're afraid of the time investment or that they can't do it or whatever it may be. And so that's one of the things that I found, you know, like in graduate school, they'll tell you like, hey, this paper needs to be 70 pages. And you're like, son of a gun, like, how do I even do that? But you just do it one page at a time and you get going and all of a sudden you're done with it and it turns out better than you thought it would.
I know when I was doing my officer training, I know I used a couple of programs. Am I allowed to name a program that we use that you can purchase or not? Yeah. So I used for writing, I used a thing called Grammarly, and that was really good because it was you know, it's obviously do the spell check, but it's also your grammar and then the context. And so that was a very good program for any sort of long writing for sure. I would highly recommend that, although it costs money. So, but you get what you pay for.
I completely agree with that, Chris, because they actually gave us in the National Fire Academy, they gave us 1 year included in our tuition and that's really helped me out a lot my first year.
I'd like to put in a plug for the National Fire Academy and the Fire Service Communications course. Mary was one of my 2 instructors in that course. It's good to see you again, Mary.
It's great to see you. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, during that course, we used a software-based program called Skills Bank, and that seemed to help with the nuts and bolts of the writing. I also want to throw in an interview I'm trying to remember the name of the author, the name of the book. It was a book, actually it was a book on tape, but they prefaced the book with an interview with the author. The title of the book was Soldier's Heart. It was a young man that enlisted even though he was only like 14. And but anyway, the author said that one of the secrets to being a good writer is to read. And I see Sam has mentioned that on the chat bar there. Read as much as possible. The more you read, the better your vocabulary gets, and then the more articulate you get when trying to write. And so that's all I wanted to toss out.
There are a couple other comments there too. Bob wrote spell check. Yes, use spell check. It is a great tool. It won't get all of your mistakes, but it really shortens the number of words left for you to work with if spelling is one of your issues. And then Dustin said, I agree with the reading. It's helped tremendously looking at and comparing other documents. Use other documents. Find the good models or provide good models within your department because it works, and we're not asking everybody to reinvent the wheel. So yeah, those are good tips. Anybody else have something to add to that before I bring up another topic?
Well, I might be getting ahead of you here, Mary, and if I am, just get to it when you get to it. But I was just kind of wondering, so if I've got that young officer that I'm responsible for, and I need to point him in the right direction, where do I start him? What's the first thing? Yeah, there's to take the class and do the reading and all this, but I want this guy to have some kind of success in a short period of time, right? So I want something that's manageable, something he can get at, succeed with, and see that, yes, this is something I can do. What do you think as a pro is the first best step for that? Those folks?
I taught a class once in Fairfax County, and there was a young guy in the class who had just finished his probationary year. And he stood up and he said, I feel 100% ready to write. He was a paramedic, so he was speaking specifically about his paramedic reports. But he said, which is not an easy document to write. So he said, I feel 100% ready because in their department, they assigned their new hires to a mentor, a writing mentor. And so for his whole first year, for every call to which they responded, the mentor would have the probie write his own mock report. It wasn't the one they were submitting, but he would do that, and then they could compare notes and say, okay, so here's what I did, and each one was a learning tool. So you could do that right away with any position, identify the good writers in there and pair them up and just create a safe process for them to read and review documents. And on that same vein, I would throw out a quick question here that we don't have time to explore in depth, but think about this one. When somebody is writing his or her first fire or EMS report, how does that person know what your department expects to see in the narrative portion of the report? How do your folks know? You're writing your first report. How do I find the answer to that question in your departments?
Yeah, so I ended up giving, and this was more to get consistency across the board, is that we gave them a template. And we just said, your report has to include each of these things, and in this order, generally speaking. And that really helped because it helped folks structure, because a lot of folks just don't know where to begin, right? And their mind isn't organized. So it said, okay, I'll do that part for you. This is how we want the information. This is what we want, and this is the order we want it in. And that seemed to help move things along. It got us at least some consistency. They might not have been better, but they were all the same level of bad, at least.
I bet they were better, and not just a better level of bad. Typically, simply providing a consistent template so that when somebody asks the question, what do you want to see in the report? When they're going to get the same answer from every officer at every station, at every shift, bingo, you're way ahead of the game. Does anybody else's department even do that, where you have a consistent response to that question? What does the department expect to see?
We have it's sort of like a template. It's a flow chart that kind of tells you how to structure it, and it sits right above the computer where you're going to be writing your report at. So you have no excuse not to see it, at least.
I mean, I bet your reports are better than average. When I see departments that provide the template, automatically they are producing better reports across the board because people know what's expected. Otherwise, it depends what officer you ask. What if you get an officer that kind of blows off writing and says, don't worry about it, nobody notices and nobody cares? Yikes, that's not where you want to be. Anyone else have an experience with that? So, do you have any ideas that have worked in your department for raising the standards for writing? Any tips that have worked for you that you'd like to pass along? And Peter's given us a very good one, and Caleb was just pointing out, give people a template. Anybody else?
So we kind of,
go ahead. What was that?
So it wasn't really a formal thing, but it all started, we had a firefighter come in and say like, hey, I have a terrible vocabulary and I'm not good at writing. And so like from the training division, we kind of made like a conscious effort, like every email we write to him, use a large vocabulary and provide good examples as like micro training opportunities. So he at least sees it every time he reads an email from us. And we haven't really formalized that because he was just nice enough to say like, hey, I got a problem. And so we've used just like micro examples and little micro training opportunities anywhere we can, just so he's forced to read it and hopefully pull something from that. But that's something we can do with our firefighters or officers. Anybody's capable of that.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Good point, Sam. You know, that micro training, I really like that concept a lot. I've used the example of, we have to submit a lot of training stuff to the state. I've used the example of like, hey, this is a direct reflection on our fire department. So if you're going to put your stamp on it, put your name on it, you need to know that you're representing our organization. That usually makes everybody go back 2 or 3 more times.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mary, we're kind of in the home stretch here. What kind of resources can you recommend for these guys?
Well, one would be to create templates. For a simple template, I have some, the National Fire Academy classes have some. Actually, Kevin, that course is changed now, but we provide a template. I think I used to give it to you guys on my own, but they have adopted it now. But another one is there are some books out there on writing, style guides, that I would recommend. I don't sell them. I don't make commissions. These are just the books I use and other firefighters have recommended. So one of them is called the Greg Reference Manual, and it's a style, it's a book of rules, and it's a book of templates. It's designed for business writing, which is what you are doing in the majority of your workplace work, is business writing, as opposed to if you go to the National Fire Academy, you're using the APA manual, which is not a very user-friendly document to begin with, but it's geared to academic style as opposed to business style. This would be more helpful in your day-to-day work. There's another book called Take Command of Your Writing that was written by a firefighter in California who was a technical writer for Hewlett-Packard once upon a time. So this one is geared, she used the Greg Reference Manual for the rules with their permission, but her she has examples for every rule, and they're geared to fire, EMS, and law enforcement. So it makes it easier to find solutions when you're trying to figure out, do I put a comma here or not? And then there's online style guides. Purdue has one that's called OWL, Purdue OWL, OWL, meaning Online Writing Lab. And it's fantastic, and it's free. And it's just a very user-friendly resource to help you find your answers to correct usage. So those would be 3 that I would throw out there offhand.
Awesome, Mary. So this is directly dovetailing into our webinar that you're going to be hosting, correct? And can you tell everybody when the date is of that?
December 14th, is that confirmed, Lee? Okay, so December 14th, we're going to do just a 1-hour webinar on focusing on the report writing. And I don't bring the legal expertise to the report writing, but I have a lot of experience in helping people organize and apply some, consider things like spelling and grammar and punctuation and conveying a clear message. So December 14th, we'll be sending information out about that.
Yeah, I highly recommend everybody take that. Mary's helped me out a lot with me attending her classes. So she's a wealth of knowledge. So please tune in for that. And how can people find you, Mary?
Firelinetraining.com. I'll put that, I guess I'll put that in there. And I'll also put my email in
Awesome.
sovick@farai.com. So yes, I'm happy to ask questions and to give people some advice on these matters. And thanks a lot for choosing to attend today. Is there anybody else that has questions? Do we have time for questions or not, if people have them, Seth?
Yeah, I can
Yes.
stay on the line and make sure you guys have plenty of opportunities.
Okay, and I can stay here too if people have questions. So I'll be quiet for a moment.
I thought Kevin's comment about how many of them have at least one person that's a walking thesaurus on your department is a good comment. That's cute.
Or the grammar Nazi.
We have one around. We have one around here. Jamie takes notes and walks around and like holds them up like signs when I do something I shouldn't do.
Mary, I have a kind of an oddly specific question about you, or not about you, but for you. I used to work with a guy that would write his reports in all caps, and then the EMS division chief really got onto him about that. He said, it feels like you're screaming at me, and he continued to write in all caps. I can't remember exactly what his reason was, but he seemed to have, or at least thought he had a good reason for that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I strongly discourage people from writing in all caps, and the main reason is that in the world of publishing, there's a lot of research done on readability factors, because they want people to choose to read what they've written, be able to comprehend it and act upon it. And what they've learned in the research is that documents written in all caps fall to the bottom of the barrel in readability. In Colorado, for example, well, you live in Colorado, don't you, Caleb? In our ballot initiatives, over the years, they've required the ballots to not be written in all caps anymore because it impedes people's ability to read the document. So there's more to say about, but the bottom line is I definitely support the recommendation to save all caps for titles, headings, but I wouldn't use it in text. You reduce readability. Good question.
Seth, that means stop texting me in all texts, all caps throughout the day when you want me to do something.
That's me yelling.
I know it is. I'm aware.
Not funny, Lee.
Any
Well,
other
guys,
questions?
I got to jump off here. I got a little girl. I got to get to ballet. So before I jump off and everybody else stays on, Mary, I want to say thank you very much. It's really an honor to be in a discussion with you, and we'll be talking real soon. But I gotta get a little girl to practice here.
I like it. You're welcome, and thanks a lot for inviting me.
Okay, take care, everybody. We'll see everybody next time. Thank you.
Bye.